I am a hunter. I've been hunting for years. I would consider myself experienced, but considerate. I keep to the seasons, abide by the rules and laws, and always, safety first. I enjoy the thrill of the kill, but I also hunt for food. If I shot a deer, I bring it home and feed the entire family. I'm telling you all this to let you know that I'm not some sort of gun-toting crazy that goes out killing for the sake of it. I've also been doing it for a long time. I'm well into my 50s now and began going out with my father when I was just a young teen. Again, this is just to let you know that I've seen many things, as you can imagine, out in the woods. So when I came across the animal I'm about to tell you about, I was confused, and I know that I wasn't mistaken. It was turkey season, so I was on early hoping to catch a big tom. I was looking to find somewhere to bunker down. It was around 5 in the morning or so, a touch of mist and still quite dark. There was a profound dampness in the air. Since I'd been in the woods many times, I knew the exact place I wanted to make a sort of base. I headed over to the spot that I'd used many times before, as it had awesome coverage with trees and a sort of dip in the ground, which seemed to almost be ready to lie and wait in. I headed over, and I was certain that I was in the right spot. But something felt off, call it a gut feeling, some sort of hunter's intuition, if you will. I can read a situation which has come in mighty handy many times before and kept me out of a couple of tight scrapes. That's what I felt now. That something wasn't right. As I said, it was still pretty dark since it was early dawn, and I was mostly feeling my way from memory than actually being guided by any sort of light. I don't take a flash or anything with me, so I hadn't seen what had decided to make my usual spot a home until I came closer. Thankfully, I heard before I saw, and what I heard made all the hairs on the back of my neck stand straight up. Dogs. I could tell it was dogs from the low growl, whining and yapping, and those sounds were the most alarming as they seemed to be coming from a pup. Now everyone knows that the worst kind of animal to encounter is a mama. They will do anything to protect their offspring, and quite rightly so. I wasn't sure why there would be a pack of feral dogs in the woods. I had never seen anything like them in there before, but I now did not want to hang out. I was just about to try and sneak off when my cell phone began to vibrate. To say I was angry was an understatement. I always turn it off entirely before a hunt. I hoped the vibration alone wouldn't attract any unwanted attention, but of course it did. Again, I heard it before I saw it, that growling noise. Only there seemed to be something very, very wrong. I stood up. I'm over 6 feet tall. That sound should have been coming from at the very most, around the top of my leg area, yet it seemed like it was coming from right beside me, and in fact I could swear that I could feel hot breath on the back of my neck. My first instinct was to run, but I also know that sometimes running makes whatever's behind you give chase. I needed to turn to face this thing and show some human dominance. Yeah, right. But that's what was going through my mind. That and total blind panic. As I slowly turned, I came face to face with what I assumed was the mama dog, only she wasn't dog-sized. She was not wolf-sized. She was people-size, a huge she-dog as big as me, not like an actual hound on 4 legs that just happened to be massive. This thing was standing on 2 legs, looking me right in the eye. She was built like a pro wrestler, covered in thick reddish-brown fur. Her head was reminiscent of that of a Doberman, with those tight, mean-looking features. Her teeth were barred, and every tooth, unlike that of a regular dog, was pinpoint and tack-sharp. Before I could even turn away, I wanted to run. I was scared out of my mind. I didn't even bother to draw my weapon or try anything to defend myself. I was that frightened right then that I honestly thought she was going to kill me, and I just wanted it to be quick and as pain-free as possible. Yes, my life flashed before my eyes right there and then. Then there was another sound, a tiny yip, a yelping noise. It was the pup, and it seemed to be gravitating towards its mother. The tiny pup, who, when I got a quick look, was actually the size of a small boy, saved my life as Mama seemed to think whatever the pup needed was more important than me, right at that moment. She quickly made her way back over to the nest, and I ran. I was no longer worried about whether she would give chase. I just hedged my bets she was more protective than aggressive and wanted me away from her offspring rather than to eat me. Thank the Lord that bet paid off and I'm alive to tell you this story. I haven't been back to that spot. I don't necessarily have faith that it was a death wish, but I also have never told anybody about it. I know that mama dog thing was aggressive. I was sure, 100% sure that I had it and was done for that night. But she was being protective. You don't mess with moms. Other hunters, though, they'd kill her and the baby, wouldn't think anything of it. Just carry the bodies out and parade them around to share all over the internet. I might have been more scared than I hope I'll ever be again, but one thing is that I'm not cruel. The other thing is, if that was a baby and a mama, there must have been a dad. And if mama was that big, what was daddy like? I hate to think about it. I suppose it is expected that anybody who chooses to follow in the footsteps of Smokey the Bear would possibly be stuck in a few scary situations. That certainly was the case for me, as I spent my nights working alongside park rangers on some of the most dangerous and terrifying trails in the States. It's not what one might think about being a ranger. Though we don't spend every day sitting around watching deer graze or children play in the playgrounds. Instead, what happens behind those locked gates is something more akin to horror movies than a picnic. If you manage to find your way through these wooded corridors without being eaten alive by some wild animal or eaten by a bear, you could end up with some serious psychological damage. As my first summer as a ranger was coming to an end, I decided that I wanted to spend one last night in the woods alone. Not many rangers do that kind of thing anymore, but for me it was sort of this cleansing ritual. My girlfriend had just broken up with me at the time, and I needed time to work through that emotional trauma. I knew there were other people who understood my pain. They would be likely willing to talk about the world ending when we got close enough in proximity. But every man needs his space from time to time, even if he is working within the confines of the law. To be honest, I wasn't really sure what to expect out there in the woods with no one else around. I had been alone quite a few times before, but never encountered any real trouble. But this time my mind was racing through the worst-case scenarios, and it almost felt like fate that I would get caught up in some kind of adventure by myself. Either I was going to find somebody who could relate to my situation, or perhaps even fall for them as they helped me through it all. Anyway, I made it to the trailhead and then began hiking down towards my favorite spot at Lake Oroville State Park. The entire park is beautiful, located not far from Sacramento, but until you are actually standing deep within its borders, you can't truly grasp its beauty. I loved watching the weather rolling over the water, feeling the cold air as it rushed past my face and into my lungs, waking me up from the lazy afternoon nap. I felt at peace with myself every time I visited this spot, but not so much that other people bothered me. That's why this was almost certainly going to be a good night. I had just crossed over one of the small bridges leading across the lake when I heard something rustling behind me, more similar to low growls than anything else, really. It sounded like something was stalking towards me, perhaps a bear. The only thing about these sounds that didn't scream bear were their frequency. They were more sporadic than I would have expected. My ears picked up the distinct sound of footsteps more than once, actually, as if somebody were running towards me directly through the thicket. Not wanting to meet with whatever was out there on my own terms, I scrambled for one of the trees and threw myself up into it to try and hide. Unfortunately, jumping back had cost me more time than I realized, and by the time I reached around and grabbed hold of a branch, something hit me hard, right in the side. You know, it feels like forever before I felt like landing against something soft and squishy. It wasn't exactly warm or inviting, so all of those other feelings must just be an illusion brought on by adrenaline. It only took a single moment for me to realize what had been happening, that I'd been wrapped at the ankles, waist, shoulders, and neck in some kind of netting. I didn't know what exactly it was made out of, but it wasn't rope. It was some sort of binding material. My hands were completely immobilized by entanglement as well, so there wasn't much I could do other than struggle against my bonds, a dead-end endeavor if there ever was one. Now, the first thing I noticed when I could finally see again is that it was completely dark around me. All light was coming from behind, with only blackness ahead. Two dim lights appeared along the walls on either side of me and began approaching slowly. As my eyes now adjusted, they looked more like natural animal eyes than any sort of man-made illusions. Even worse, I noticed that the blackness ahead of me wasn't really coming from a lack of light at all. Instead, there appeared to be some kind of organic wall blocking my view, spreading out across the room to each side. I had no idea how large this place was, but it must have been bigger than what I could see. One behind me and another in front of me. They made themselves known moments later, footsteps. The noises were too far away for me to make out at first, but then I could hear that they belonged to something, and more than two. At this point, fear began gripping my heart as I lashed out against my bonds once again, only to find that they hadn't been loosened in the slightest. More so, I thought. We'll get to that in a moment. I was hauled from my small prison by several sets of long, clawed hands that dragged me over what appeared to be some kind of altar. It was much different from one of those sacrificial altars appearing to be used in ancient times for rituals. The ones to appease otherworldly beings were said to lurk within the space between two worlds. But this one seemed more like a place where people got together for satanic worship or other unholy activities. These beings holding me lorded me down onto it and began weaving some sort of flower all around me while chanting something in this ungodly language. I was so terrified. I swear I could have had a heart attack. I couldn't make out all the words, but I had no idea what this thing was or what they were saying. The entire group of these things began chanting in unison as they surrounded me, continued weaving more of this plant material around me. It felt like forever before they finally got to the last one. All I could do was just lay there on my back, completely immobilized by flowers while these creatures circled around me once and turned their backs towards me. The chant stopped abruptly, and every creature but one turned to leave. The remaining one tossed this mask aside, revealing a set of devilish features underneath it. What I had been dealing with looked like a combination of wild, feral human beings and kind of goblinish people. You know, it kind of reminded me of the trolls or orcs in Lord of the Rings. Humanoid, but also not human. That's what they reminded me of. It stood there, shaking its head from side to side slowly, with its arms raised upward as I tried to break free. Now again, I cannot reiterate how terrifying this was. I had no idea what was going to happen, and I was convinced in that moment I was about to be sacrificed by some sort of underground dwelling creatures. I was so scared, beyond belief. Then this thing pulled its arm down after shaking its head and walked away. Completely immobilized, I tried my best to get out of my entrapment. I believe it was the massive amounts of adrenaline exploding through my entire being that allowed me to break free. As I did, though, I could hear these things coming back, and I knew I had to escape as quickly as I could. Once fully free, I started to run for it, escaping in just a matter of time, feeling my way out of this black, organic labyrinth. I don't know if I was in a cave or what this was, but as I reflect back on these memories so much flooding through my mind, I feel like I kind of blacked out. I don't really know if I remember much after that, but I do distinctly remember collapsing on the ground and being found later on. I know that's probably very anticlimactic, but when the human body endures that kind of trauma and stress, it does things to the brain that aren't exactly normal. Anyway, I was treated at the hospital, ultimately taken back to the station and sent home. I didn't actually believe what I experienced at first. I thought it was some crude nightmare or horrible hallucination. But it wasn't until later that I realized it must have been something that really happened, because I actually had binding marks around my ankles, my thighs, my waist, and my wrists. Those bindings were tight, and I must have wiggled free enough that I loosened them. Like I said, whatever the bindings were, they were this crude rope vine material. I've never seen it before in my life. None of them really believed me, though, when I actually got a chance to describe what happened. They thought I was either making it up or just had a bad nightmare. As you can probably bet, this incident has been difficult for me. At any rate, this is my story, and I hope you can get enjoyment from a real-life traumatic event. I don't care if you believe me. I know there's something out there that lives underneath the ground, something that isn't quite human. I remember this one time, about 5 years back, when me and my wife decided to leave the hustle and bustle of Chicago and settle down in the quaint countryside of Montana. We found ourselves a cozy rental cabin, nestled deep in a serene neighborhood. The place was right at the end of a cul-de-sac, a perfect getaway from our previous home where cars zoomed by every minute. We thought it'd be a nice change, a chance to be close to nature. A massive ranch with untouched land stretched out behind our cabin. We imagined it would be pleasant to have critters as our neighbors. The neighborhood was small, just a handful of cabins around. We got acquainted with our neighbors soon after our arrival. They were friendly folk. But one thing that intrigued us was the large ranch at the end. It always seemed deserted. No one in the neighborhood seemed to know much about it. Like I said, our cabin was a rental. All the cabins around were fairly new, so there wasn't a long history of residents. Our neighbors mentioned that they hadn't seen any activity at the ranch. They'd occasionally hear strange noises late at night, which they brushed off as coyotes or mountain lions that were known to inhabit the region. About a couple of months after we moved in, we adopted this adorable Labrador puppy from the local animal shelter. We named him Bruno. Bruno was full of energy but lacked training, but we figured, since we had a spacious backyard, we had plenty of room for him to run around and play. One evening, I returned from work earlier than usual. My wife was visiting her folks, and I went out to check on Bruno. To my surprise, I found that he had dug a hole under the fence and was nowhere in sight. One of my neighbors, a kind lady with 2 kids, told me that she saw Bruno running towards the ranch. She would have chased him down, but her kids needed her attention. So I decided to venture towards the ranch to find Bruno. The ranch was hidden behind a thick line of pines. I had never really taken a good look at it before. As I approached the back fence of the ranch, I noticed an old weathered sign that read, "Trespassers will be prosecuted." I hesitated, wondering if I should risk trespassing. The ranch looked abandoned. The fence was worn out and the undergrowth was thick. I peeked through a window and saw dusty old furniture, but no sign of any inhabitants. I was in 2 minds about whether to go ahead and trespass. When I heard a chilling scream, I ducked and tried to see through the fence. All of a sudden, everything went quiet. And then, I saw this rabbit dart out from the undergrowth and sprint across the field. The scream seemed to have come from it. What I saw next still gives me the chills. A huge creature, something like a wolf, but not quite, was chasing after the rabbit. It had an enormous mane of fur around its neck and was snarling ferociously. The creature caught up with the rabbit in no time and clamped its jaws around its neck. Blood splattered everywhere. I turned around and sprinted back to my cabin, locking myself in. My heart was pounding in my chest. I had never seen anything like that before. The most terrifying part was that this creature, this beast, was running on its hind legs. Its body was eerily humanoid, except for its monstrous size and the thick fur. My mind was filled with thoughts of Bruno. I couldn't stop worrying about him. I decided to alert my neighbors. The few I could reach were convinced that it must have been a mountain lion, the largest known predator in the area. I tried to convince them otherwise. But what could I say? I didn't know what I had seen. Feeling a sense of responsibility, I decided to alert everyone. I knocked on the last cabin's door and was greeted by this old sunburnt guy, rugged and a bit intimidating. He said he's seen that wolf. At first, I thought he was talking about Bruno, but he was referring to the monstrosity that had chased the rabbit. As I stood there, dumbfounded, trying to explain what I had seen, he invited me into his cabin and pulled out a sketchbook. He flipped to a page with a sketch, and I swear, it looked incredibly similar to the beast I had seen. This guy, He had recently moved in with his son. He used to live across the valley and had encountered this creature when he was out hunting. He referred to it as the Wolfman. He narrated his encounter. He initially mistook it for a regular wolf, but when it stood upright, he realized he was dealing with something far more sinister. I was dumbstruck by his story. I suggested that we should call the cops. He just chuckled. I stepped outside his cabin, feeling overwhelmed. And that's when I saw Bruno. Bruno came sprinting towards me, whimpering and shaking uncontrollably. I picked him up and held him close. He was shaking like a leaf. I took him home, wrapped him in a blanket, and held him tight. At that moment, everything seemed surreal. But after hearing similar stories on your channel, I've come to accept that what I saw was real. I pray to never encounter such a creature again. We moved out as soon as our lease was up. I'm just an average everyday guy. I enjoy football, a cold beer, and spending time with my friends. I used to dismiss crazy conspiracies, aliens, and all that nonsense, but now I'm not so sure. Something happened to me that changed my perspective forever. I find myself relating more to those people who I once considered eccentric. When you witness something truly inexplicable, it forces you to question everything you thought you knew. It all took place years ago in West Virginia. Deep in the rural areas, trees grow thick and the rivers run deep. My two buddies and I embarked on our usual fishing trip. It had become an annual tradition since our college days. We were just regular guys with different jobs. I worked at a restaurant, my friend Mike was in the tech industry earning a good income, and Rob taught high school. That day started like any other. We fished, enjoyed a few beers, cracked jokes, and relaxed. As the day drew to a close, we gathered around the campfire, chatting away. Then, out of nowhere, something incredibly strange occurred. A colossal shadow passed over us, blotting out the stars. I'm talking massive, resembling the size of a small plane. What made it even more unsettling were its glowing, eerie eyes. It resembled a large bat with a demonic appearance. Needless to say, we were all terrified. Yet still we decided to follow it, grabbing our flashlights and guns as we ventured into the forest in the direction it flew. We discovered some significant footprints on the ground and broken branches high up in the trees, but nothing more. Although we didn't encounter the creature again that night, we kept hearing the most chilling noises, high-pitched screeches and flapping sounds that gave us the creeps. Needless to say, we didn't get much sleep. To be honest, we were genuinely frightened. This wasn't just some ordinary wild animal we were dealing with, it was something else, something beyond explanation. The next morning, we came across a local hunter named Hank. When we recounted our experience, he appeared spooked but didn't say much. It was as if he didn't want to accept our account, yet he knew better. We swiftly departed shortly after that encounter. Unfortunately, Rob stumbled over a branch and foolishly broke his ankle, forcing us to cut our trip short and take him to the hospital. Once we returned to civilization, we delved deeper into the incident. Mike stumbled upon stories about sightings of a massive flying creature in West Virginia known as the Mothman. Suddenly, everything began to fall into place. Initially, it sounded far-fetched, but it was the only plausible explanation for what we witnessed. The Mothman was said to possess glowing eyes similar to the ones we saw, and the location we were in was notorious for Mothman sightings. As it turns out, the Mothman is a legendary creature sighted by many individuals throughout West Virginia. Its true nature remains a mystery, but it has become part of the local folklore. While we may never discover the complete truth, I'm telling you, what we saw was the actual Mothman. It may sound incredible, but it fits the circumstances, my friend. We decided to change our fishing destination from then on. We wanted to avoid any future encounters with the Mothman, if you catch my drift. Despite our encounter, we were profoundly shaken. It became the primary topic of conversation whenever we gathered. We even attempted to reach out to experts, individuals who research such phenomena, but none of them could provide a definitive answer. Everyone had their own theories about the Mothman, but nobody could offer concrete evidence. Thus, we were left to draw our own conclusions. We still continue our annual fishing trips, but we deliberately steer clear of West Virginia. We aren't seeking another visit from the Mothman, if you understand what I mean. We opted for a more popular, well-known location, where the biggest threat is a sunburn. However, every time we gather around the campfire, the story of that night inevitably resurfaces. Our friends and families struggle to comprehend our tale. Some think we're playing a prank, while others simply shake their heads, attributing it to an excessive consumption of horror movies. Furthermore, everyone loves to mention the fact that we were drinking beer that night. But truth be told, we all enjoy a good drink. Even if we were slightly intoxicated, we all witnessed the same phenomenon. What are the odds of that happening seriously? This experience, my friend, shook me to my core. It completely transformed my perception of the world. Previously, I believed the world was straightforward, that everything could be explained, you know? But now I realize that mysteries exist, things that science cannot currently fathom or may never explain. Regarding the media, I used to trust their reports without question. However, I now find myself wondering what else they might be concealing or intentionally keeping from us. Could there be more stories like mine, dismissed and swept under the rug because they are too strange, too unconventional? I can't help but scrutinize everything I read and hear now, constantly searching for the unexplained, the extraordinary. As for the government, I have always maintained a healthy dose of skepticism. Nevertheless, I can't help but consider all those tales of cover-ups and hidden truths. If something as remarkable as the Mothman can exist, what else is out there that we are unaware of? Are they hiding information from us, or are they as clueless as the rest of us? It's difficult to trust them when I know they withhold so much. Seeing the Mothman has made life significantly more intriguing, that's for sure. I now appreciate the enigmatic nature of our world, the unknown. It has injected a sense of excitement into my daily life, knowing that there's more to our world than what meets the eye. Moreover, it has made me realize how much we take our safety and the predictability of life for granted. After witnessing something like that, I've become more vigilant, more aware of my surroundings. Ultimately, what I've come to understand is that there are things in this world that may forever elude our comprehension and explanation. And that's perfectly all right. It's not about possessing all the answers, my friend. It's about embracing the questions and relishing the journey. My name is Mark Thompson, and I've been working as a research assistant at a company based on the outskirts of London for the past 5 years. The facility primarily focuses on chemical research, and I've spent countless late nights working alone in the laboratory. It was on one of these nights that I had an encounter that I still struggle to comprehend. It was April 16th, 2022, around 2 a.m. The lab was bathed in a dim, flickering fluorescent light that always created eerie shadows along the walls. The atmosphere was heavy with the scent of chemicals and the hum of the ventilation system. I was alone as usual, engrossed in my work, trying to meet an approaching deadline. As the hours ticked by, my concentration began to wane. I rubbed my eyes and stretched my cramped muscles. I needed a break. So, I decided to step outside into the chilly night air to clear my mind. The small courtyard adjacent to the laboratory was surrounded by a dense forest, creating an additional illusion of isolation. As I stepped outside, the cool breeze immediately sent shivers down my spine. The moon, partially hidden behind thick clouds, cast an eerie glow upon the surroundings. It was then that I noticed an unusual rustling sound emanating from the nearby bushes. My curiosity became heightened, and I walked toward the source of the noise, cautiously. As I approached the bushes, the rustling grew louder, accompanied by an occasional low growl. My heart began to race, and I could feel beads of sweat forming on my forehead. I hesitated for a moment, contemplating whether to proceed or retreat to the safety of the laboratory. My scientific curiosity eventually won over my instincts, and I pushed through the foliage. The sight that greeted my eyes was, to put it in one word, unbelievable. It was a creature that I am sure was not any known species. It stood at least 6 feet tall, with a muscular build that was covered in coarse, matted fur. Its face was elongated, resembling a cross between a wolf and a reptile. Its eyes glowed with an otherworldly intensity, the irises a piercing shade of yellow. Sharp, serrated teeth lined its snout. I watched as the creature prowled around the courtyard. It moved with an unnatural grace, its movements fluid and silent. Its limbs were long and powerful, terminating in claws that could tear through flesh effortlessly. I could feel its predatory gaze scanning the area, as if searching for something or someone. Time seemed to stand still as I remained hidden, observing the creature from the safety of the bushes. Fear rushed through me, but curiosity kept me rooted in place. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to flee, but I couldn't tear my gaze away from this being. After what felt like an eternity, the creature abruptly turned its head, locking its glowing eyes directly on mine. A jolt of terror shot through me, paralyzing my body. We stared at each other, our gazes locked. Its piercing yellow eyes seemed to bore into me. I knew instantly that this creature was revealing to me a depth of ancient wisdom and unspoken secrets. With a sudden swiftness, the creature turned and vanished into the darkness of the forest. The rustling of leaves and the crunching of twigs soon faded away, leaving only the night's oppressive silence in its wake. I stood there trembling, unable to process the magnitude of what I had just witnessed. Once the initial shock subsided, a whirlwind of thoughts consumed my mind. I questioned the reality of what I had seen, doubting my own senses. Should I report this encounter to my colleagues, or would they claim I was overly fatigued? The fear of being labeled insane gnawed at me, but deep down I knew I couldn't keep this experience to myself. After gathering my scattered thoughts, I hurried back into the laboratory, my heart still pounding in my chest. With trembling hands, I wrote down every detail of the encounter in my journal, trying to capture the essence of the creature's presence. It was my attempt to preserve the authenticity of the experience, to ensure that this encounter would not fade away like a mere dream. In the following days, I confided in a trusted colleague about what I had witnessed. Although they listened with an open mind, skepticism shadowed their expression. To this day, I cannot help but wonder about the creature's true nature and purpose. Was it an undiscovered species, a genetic mutation, or something far more extraordinary? The encounter left me with more questions than answers, a lingering sense of awe and an undeniable awareness that there are mysteries in this world that defy conventional understanding. That night changed me. It shattered the boundaries of my perception and made me acutely aware of the vast unknown that lies just beyond our grasp. It taught me humility, reminding me that the world is far more complex and extraordinary than we can ever fathom. And though the encounter left me with an unshakable sense of unease, it also ignited within me a deep curiosity to explore the boundaries of our existence, to seek answers to the enigmas that dwell in the shadows of our reality.